Thank you, Jamie and Armando, for the invitation. Maddie and I are both happy to be here to talk about something we've been thinking about since at least May of last year, when Maddie uh, did some work with an undergraduate summer scholars program sponsored by Launch, thinking through AI and ethics. And this is the spot she ended up being really interested in, the questions regarding academic integrity, uh, which isn't something that was necessarily at the front of my mind. And so it's been a really great experience for me to talk with Maddie, to learn from her, think with her about what we're doing in education that's working, what we're doing that's not working. A little bit about us. I am a faculty in the Department of Philosophy. I teach ethics. And as Maddie and I were preparing for this discussion, she pointed out that I have a huge advantage compared to many other faculty because ethics is the study of what is right and good. And so we bring up that as a question in all of the courses that I teach. And so when we think about what should the ethics of AI look like, or how should students be using LLMs, that's actually perfectly in the space of two of the courses I teach. I teach a large course on engineering ethics, where large language models have been more of a concern as far as student work, writing work, that kind of thing. But the other two courses that I teach, Ethics in a Digital Age and Ethics of Artificial Intelligence, are courses that center on or focus on how new technologies such as LLMs transform social values, social norms, what it means to be happy, what it means to be good, what we should seek out of this life that we get. My research interests follow my teaching interests. I do a lot of work on philosophy and ethics of science and technology, and more broadly, ethics and political philosophy. Maddie.
Howdy, everyone. I'm Maddie. I'm a senior here at A&M. I plan to graduate in May, and after graduation, I plan to attend the Bush School of Government here in College Station for a year to get a graduate certificate in public management before attending law school. Like Dr. Miller said, I kind of got in this research back in May due to Summer Scholars sponsored by Launch. And kind of the inspiration for my research was being a student in these changing times of technology and trying to learn through everything along with y'all.
I see we have a hand up already, and my nature is always to indulge a hand because if there's a hand up, it means someone is listening to me. And this is true whether I'm in a classroom or on a Zoom call. Uh,
Ah,
Mahajabin, do you have a
yes.
question?
I'm not really. Thank you for recognizing me. I am Mahjabin Chaudhary, and I'm an educational researcher at Center for Teaching Excellence, and I work with Jamie and Armando. And I raised my hand just to make sure that we wanted to let everyone know that we are going to be recording the first 15 minutes of your presentation so that everyone knows about it before you start. So that's why I raised my hand. I hope that's okay.
No problem. Thank you for that. Good for us to keep in mind. I had warned Maddie that this may be recorded, and she's fully ready for that. Uh, this is actually a transformation of the world we live in, too. If back up 8 years, and if the CTE asked me to give a talk like this, I don't have to think about where it will end up on the internet after we finish it. And that the world's different today. That's one of the topics we talk about in my in a Digital Age course. So if you're interested in that, please register, but you'll need to sign up early because the class fills up.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Okay, so the aim of the presentation, we tried to keep this part simple because as we understood, we present for a bit and then hopefully we get into some really good Q&A. We want to think about three aspects of AI in the classroom. First is to think about AI as a resource, to think about what it can do. Most of the time when I think of AI, I think of it as a bit of a problem, or when I think of it pedagogically, I think of it as a problem. But I think there are some ways that students are using it that's useful. And at this point, I probably should admit that I don't use AI much. In fact, I don't have a ChatGPT account. I've never used it. And when I was talking with Maddie about this, she had also admitted that she's on the spectrum of student users, way down at the minimalist use. Maddie, do you want to say a little something about that?
Yeah, I think I just at this point know a little too much about it from all of the past 9 months-ish of research, and it kind of scares me as a student just from seeing other people's stories about it. And yeah, I think I just know too much now, so I don't use it.
If we were going to fill out the panel a little bit fuller, we could have an AI super user, someone that's using large language models to do 80% of their work. That student probably wouldn't admit that they were up to that because the second topic of our talk is AI and academic integrity. We'll spend some time focusing on that. Maddy will have the lead on that because that's the specific focus of her research. And then we have a slide on AI and the future of education. And this first part of the presentation, which is 6 or 7 slides, is hopefully gives you my perspective as well as Maddy's, so you get the faculty perspective and the student perspective. The last part of the presentation are 2 slides where Maddy's able to explain a little bit about what she's learned over the last 8 months of research and where she hopes to end up with her undergraduate thesis. What is the good with AI? What can AI do as a resource? These are ways that I've had either students or colleagues tell me that they've used AI. The first good use, it seems to me, of AI is a quick intro to a new topic. I don't think there's anything wrong with a student who's curious in, say, intellectual property, asking AI to give them a quick overview of intellectual property or even of perhaps Gauss's theory of intellectual property, some kind of focused inquiry. That seems like a really helpful use of AI that helps our students get a sense of the information that's out there. Perhaps with the big asterisk that Maddy pointed out, we have to always be a little skeptical of what we're told by AI because it doesn't know whether it's right or not. A second good use of AI, and this is the one I've seen from my peers, is identifying possible extensions or new connections with ideas that they have. One of my colleagues and I were working on a grant application, and I said, we need to say in comments, we're trading on Zoom, Google Doc back and forth. I said, we need to say something about X. And she wrote back and said, well, ChatGPT says we should say X, Y, and Z about it. And I thought, well, ChatGPT is not great at this, but that one of those points is actually pretty interesting. And if I don't have a problem, and then the next question is, should I have a problem with my colleague using ChatGPT in this situation? And for me, the answer was no. That seems like a really good use, something that maybe you learn if you were looking at Wikipedia or using other general resources. If you're getting that through ChatGPT instead of another resource, and you're my colleague, I don't have a problem with it. I don't think I should have a problem with a student doing the same thing. My students have also told me that they'll sometimes write papers and say, hey, ChatGPT, what do you think of this? And sometimes ChatGPT will say, have you thought about connecting this idea and that idea? That too seems like a valuable use for ChatGPT. Now, one of the things I've tried to impress upon my students is that there's a big difference between writing something and asking ChatGPT as it is for feedback, as it were, the third bullet point here, as a readily available sounding board, then having ChatGPT write something, and then you providing feedback to it, in a sense, or you providing editing work to it, because there certainly will be times for our students when they're not able to or don't want to use ChatGPT. But all these, to me, seem like reasonable uses of AI that will help our students get up to speed on things they don't know. Especially Maddy and I have spent some time talking about how education has been interrupted with COVID, especially over the last few years, and our students have some gaps in what they know. It seems to me that ChatGPT may be very helpful in helping fill out some of those gaps. Maddy, the last 2 bullet points on the slide are yours.
Okay, another good thing ChatGPT can do is sequence ideas and provide coherence. So to me, what that means is asking ChatGPT like, hey, I have a paper I need to write with all of these main points. How should those go in order to provide the best paper that I can write, knowing I need to write about all of these things? Just kind of putting it in a way that makes sense to everyone. Dr. Miller always jokes with me that I think through things in a very different way than most people do. So sometimes the order of my writing doesn't make sense to other people the way I would want it to. Also, it's important to note here that potential uses vary by discipline. So the way I use ChatGPT in philosophy for helping me outline a paper is very different than, say, a STEM major would use ChatGPT to help them like explain the problem. Like if you're in math, you would probably use ChatGPT like, hey, here's an example of a problem I need to do. Can you walk me through this so I can fully understand how to answer the question and make it make logical sense to me?
This point was one I hadn't thought about, which I should have, because my undergraduate degree is in chemical engineering. And the difference between using another resource or a former student's paper or something like that to provide the framework for answering a new problem is really different than if you're able to offload that task to artificial intelligence and say, hey, ChatGPT, help me figure out the force dynamics on this particular equation. Here are the specifics. Because one thing that the large language models can do is work with those specifics in a way that that old-fashioned AI wasn't able to do, where it's basically an algorithm that's been written by someone that given some input creates some output. It seems to me that if I were teaching engineering, I'd have to think very hard about what I was doing here, because changing the numbers, the inputs on a question, probably won't help me figure out whether my student actually understands the theories in the same way that it would have 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And then when I think about regulation of AI or the rules or principles that we're using, I wonder if it isn't a bit of a fool's errand to think that we can have something university-wide, or even that should be our standard. Having said that, there's big reasons for us to push in that direction, which we'll get to a little later in the presentation. So as I said, Maddy's research is on AI and academic integrity. I should have stopped her early on in the research to point out that you have to pick a different topic, because if we wanted to do shorthand with academic integrity, it's AI, and then our slide looks like AI and AI. But Maddy, why don't you tell us what academic integrity is and why it matters?
So most people know what academic integrity is, but it's hard to put a definition behind it just because it's widely understood, but not specifically. So simply, the most simple way you can put it is academic integrity is an ethical policy and moral code of conduct set by universities that makes people within the university system take responsibility for their education through a culture of values, including honesty, respect, and fairness, through avoiding actions of academic misconduct, including plagiarism, cheating, and use of others' work within an academic setting. While that definition is fine, academic integrity really is much more than that. And the easiest way to kind of think about what academic integrity is to think about what integrity means first. So integrity is not worrying about the perception or consequences of an action, but only that the action is a morally and ethically correct thing to do at all times. So when applying integrity to an academic environment, it's important that the values are the culture, and it's the utmost expectation of students and faculty and administration. It's important to note that it's for everyone. It's a culture not just for students, not just for faculty. It's for everyone, that should be embodied by everyone through those values. Obviously, it's important because it helps protect the actual education of the student and the faculty, and helps the faculty care about the student's education, and it helps students obtain the knowledge needed later in jobs, future jobs. That's why everyone's in college, is to help them in the future.
One of the things that's come up in our conversations is that academic integrity, of course, matters for faculty too. And the problems there, I think, are somewhat terrifying. I am an associate editor for 2 journals, and I've read paragraphs that I'm reasonably sure were written by an LLM, or could have been written by an LLM. And it's going to be very hard for us to figure out how to handle that. And I think in most cases, those aren't bad actors intentionally trying to subvert a system. It's researchers trying to respond to time pressures, that kind of thing. So I think academic, and one of the things I've tried to impress upon Maddy is that this isn't just a student problem. It's also it's a learner problem, which includes faculty as well. I mentioned already that we need to rethink assessments. I've been trying to do that in my courses. one of the things I did last semester was to ask a question on a final exam to ask students to describe their research project. What was the main question you asked? How does the argument move? If you actually did the work, you should ace that. If you didn't do the work, that may be a problem because ChatGPT might be able to answer that. You may not be able to. I've also shifted towards multimodal presentation of research, not just our students turning in a paper, but they're also presenting in class and maybe with an exam component like what I just mentioned. It seems to me a really great, but not at all practical way to solve this problem is to give oral examinations. Ask students what they know and see what they can say without any resource available to them. That doesn't, there are many learning objectives, of course, for which that's not a good solution, but it seems to be one thing that we'd like our students to be able to do, or one thing we'd like to be able to assess is what can students do when they don't have any resources to help them. So those are some ideas I've had about trying to change my assessments or responding to the fact that I know ChatGPT is out there. In the discussion part, perhaps I can get some other ideas. You can give me some comments on those. The third bullet point is one that Maddy actually I think has thought about a little bit more than I have. I've run into a few issues. It turns out that ChatGPT isn't a very good philosopher. It connects associated ideas, but it doesn't form tight inferences. So I tell students, if you use ChatGPT and I don't catch you, you'll probably get a C plus or a D minus. Sorry, C minus or D plus. If I do catch you, then we have a problem. Or if I do have good reason to believe that you've committed an academic integrity violation, then we have a problem. The standard I'm told to use by university rule is preponderance of evidence. That's hard. That means more likely than not, and that's a very low bar. And when I was talking with Maddy, she came at this from the student perspective, which I'll let her explain in just a minute. It seems like a low bar to make an accusation. Maddy, what's the problem from the student perspective?
Yeah, that's low bars for students as well. I mean, it's super frustrating to know that even if a professor thinks you use ChatGPT, there's detection software like Turnitin isn't. They say they're 100% accurate. They are not. That's what I found through my research. And as a student, it's really scary not knowing if you get accused of using ChatGPT or another generative AI application to say write a paper and the professor thinks you more likely than not did, there isn't really a way to prove you did or did not write that paper at the end of the day. And when you're accused of an academic integrity violation, that follows you forever. And as someone who wants to go to a graduate school, it's just a scary world to live in, not knowing or knowing that you can't really prove yourself any other way.
Thank you. I had never thought of that from a student perspective. I've thought about the gravity of academic integrity charges, of course, but never about how do you defend yourself in a case like that, or even if you're the honor council, how do you adjudicate a case where it seems more likely than not that there's a problem? What do you expect from the student? What do you expect from faculty? Okay, last joint slide here. What does the future look like? Great question. I don't think we're heading for a utopia. I don't think we're heading for a dystopia. But I think we're probably headed for a really transformed K through 12 pipeline. In the ethics of AI course I taught last semester, my students were telling me what their 7th and 8th grade nieces, nephews, friends were doing in their homework. I mentioned that ChatGPT is not a very good philosopher at the college level. I bet ChatGPT would do great at 8th grade assignments. And so they were terrified that students are going to make short-term decisions to be cool or to get away with as little work as possible. And I told my students, if you haven't done the work through high school, through middle school and high school, we're going to have a big problem because I expect you to have those skills solid already. And then I can build on those. But if there's gaps that come up because you've used ChatGPT or other LLMs for such things, that's going to be a different world that we'll be teaching in. And I think I've already seen that, not because of ChatGPT, but because of COVID, where I have good students who care about what they're doing, who simply cannot do something that I asked them to do that they should have learned probably like in the third week of February in their junior year. They simply zoned out, or the online teaching didn't work, whatever it is. And I don't really know as an instructor, as a college instructor, what to do there. We have the Writing Center, we have some resources like, but I think that's going to be a big challenge for us going forward. One of the things that came out of that discussion was a semester-long discussion about the purpose of education. My students saying, look, the reason that you write the 5-paragraph essay isn't so that you can write a 5-paragraph essay. It's so that you can organize thoughts in your head, you can present them in a clear way, and you can come to some kind of conclusion. These are skills we need going forward. That's why we should do them. And it was really interesting to hear students get to that point when they think through, why am I spending 4 years of my life at a university at Texas A&M? As Maddy said, it's because of what it will help us do when we go out. If all our students come in with that perspective, we have no problems from an academic integrity perspective. We have no problems with ChatGPT. They'll use it in an intentional way that will contribute to their development. Again, as Maddy said, I'm lucky because I teach an ethics course and we can spend time talking about that throughout the semester. But that may be something we need to think about as a university, that maybe what was assumed before can't be, because the technological ways of evading whatever processes we have in place now allow students to do that a little bit too easily. This leads to perhaps rethinking faculty-student interactions, a huge challenge at a big university like A&M, where we're tasked with teaching 80,000 students. I don't have big problems with academic integrity issues in the small courses I teach. My students all know me. They know what I'm expecting of them, and I'm able to give them assignments that they care about. So my concerns for academic integrity are pretty small in those courses. The bigger the course gets, the bigger the problems get. And we may want to think as a university what we're giving students, the experiences we're giving them, because we're setting a culture where we've been trying to adopt as many technological tools as we can to do our work as fast as possible. But it's not the same thing for them to do it. We need to explain why. But we also need to be providing helpful feedback for them, so that they understand that they're there to learn and to develop, not simply to check a number of boxes that allows them to get to a degree. And then the last point here, and Maddy will say something about both of these, I think we have a new challenge in equipping students to use AI and to be able to not use AI. Because I don't think it's fair to students to have them graduate without ever having used AI, walk into a job where they may be asked to do it. But I also know that a whole lot of what people do when they get out into the world is to write about proprietary information, to do all kinds of work that can't be shared outside of the confines of the company. So they need to be able to use AI and not use it. This came up in a forum with faculty at the beginning of last semester with a colleague from visualization, who said, we have no idea what we're supposed to do here because the new AI is so powerful, but it also all may be illegal in 4 years. So what do we do with our students? Yeah, great question. I think that's a big challenge for us. Maddy, you have these 2 points, and then we'll talk a bit about your research.
Okay, yes. So I think jumping back to rethinking faculty-student interactions, from the student perspective, in the larger classes, the smaller classes, this isn't as big of an issue just because you have more of a personal relationship with the faculty member or your professor. But in the bigger classes, it's almost like not treating the students like machines that are just outputs for information to check this box off just to keep going. It's, as a student, it's the knowledge of the professor actually wanting you to learn that can add that extra deepened care for learning the material. I know at the end of the day, it's up to the student to want to learn the material, to actually learn the material, but knowing there's that extra layer of someone actually caring about the material they're teaching you as well, especially with all of the new technology giving a lot of new opportunities for academic misconduct, is really important, and not treating, even if there has been an instance in the past where the professor has caught a student using ChatGPT, not treating every other student like the student who used the ChatGPT. I keep calling it the bad apple. Not every student's the bad apple. There's just one. It doesn't rot the whole tree. And then equipping students to use AI and to be able to not use AI. I think at the end of the day, AI is a really important tool. I mean, there's new information at the fingertips of almost everyone, which is amazing. It's a new way to learn. Um, but to be able to not use AI, I mean, the whole rest of my career, at least, I can't just use AI for every single answer every single time. So I need to learn how to learn by myself as well.
Okay, we're long, so Maddy, I'm not going to say anything in response to that, but please tell us a little bit about your research project, and then we'll get to Q&A, and we already have one good comment in the chat, which we'll get to.
Okay, perfect. So like Dr. Miller said, and I've said earlier, I've been working on this since May, and we've been talking about this all morning. The new development, increased widespread of LLMs like ChatGPT has really necessitated a change in the way universities treat academic integrity and treat their students and everything else just through the changing digital times. So through my research, I've kind of gone through what's so different between ChatGPT and something like Google search. What's the big difference? Why is there such a need for this new rethinking? What I found, I'll just give you a little quick synopsis because I know we're going over, but since LLMs are in a conversation-like way, it is much easier for students to just take the information and put it straight into their work. Since there are not also detection software programs that are as effective as they should be for universities to be using them, it's a lot easier for students to get away with it. And it's such unique outputs every single time that the likeliness of getting caught are slim, but when you are caught, you're caught. To kind of figure out what principles and standards that universities should use, I've gone through virtue ethics, utilitarianism. I'm getting to duty ethics and care ethics as well. I'll go into a little bit about virtue ethics since that's my longest point at this time. Since academic integrity is about culture, it's important to instill the virtues of honesty, justice. Aristotle doesn't say it specifically, but responsibility within a university system in order to reach full academic integrity efficiency. And then you can go to the next slide whenever you're ready. So what I've kind of found are these policies and best practices for institutions when having academic integrity statements being at their full potential in the digital age. So regulation instead of banning, that's a pretty obvious one. We've talked about AI being a tool. It's not all bad. Some of it will be extremely beneficial to everyone at some point once it's figured out. Updated academic integrity statements. This one is kind of, I mean, self-explanatory. With new technology, you need to specifically state what is regulated, what is not. For a universalized statement within a university, it can be a little bit broader, but each discipline should have a more specific one based on like math uses it this way, philosophy uses it this way. Leading by example is a big one. So if students see the professor always using ChatGPT and LLMs to create all of their assignments, the student's not going to feel inclined to follow these rules because the professor isn't either. So leading by example and just showing students like, hey, this is okay, this is not. Students are still kids. We still kind of pick up everything we see and go based on who we see as a leader. So that's a huge one as well. And then detection software. In my perfect world, detection software would be where it needed to be to use it in universities. However, right now it's not. But once it is in place, detection software should be the leading force in detecting whether or not a student actually committed an act of academic misconduct instead of having implicit biases from professors and treating them as if they did, even if they did not.
Thank you, Maddy, for that. The bad apple question, I think it also brings up this really interesting tension. As faculty, we need to treat all students the same way. We need to have the same processes for everything we do when we look for academic integrity violations. However, it seems like not all students. There, it's just maybe a question of coming up with really good processes to make sure that they're efficient enough in the first line or second line of screening that we can treat all students fairly to make sure that we're not accusing some based off of any kind of biases, as she says. Okay, that's it for our prepared presentation.